Across America, millions walk beneath the tall canopies of its national parks, believing they are entering places of peace, silence, and untouched nature. Yet inside ranger stations, far from the visitors' trails, a quieter story exists. It is told in incomplete logs, sealed files, and whispers after midnight about lights that move without wind, valleys that shift on their own, and voices that echo when no one stands. Over the decades, reports have vanished, maps have been altered, and those who ask too many questions are reassigned. What began as isolated incidents have formed a pattern, a network of silence, stretching across the most protected land on Earth. Tonight, we open the folders never meant for public view, tracing the testimonies of those who guard the wilderness but no longer trust what lives within it. Whispers beneath the pines. It begins in the quiet hours before dawn. Mist sits low across the valleys of the Great Smoky Mountains, and a ranger named Thomas Hale adjusts his flashlight as he steps onto a narrow trail known as Deep Creek. The sound of water is steady somewhere ahead, but the forest carries another tone, a soft, uneven rhythm, like footsteps keeping time with his own. The incident report he filed in 2009 describes the sound simply, one echo, too many. He never found the source. Across the United States, in places managed by the National Park Service, there are similar accounts that never reach the public. Rangers mention them in low voices, sometimes after a long shift, usually off record. Reports often end without answers. Missing hikers found miles off trail, deep footprints that begin and stop abruptly, campfires built in inaccessible ravines. The official files use calm phrases, unverified tracks, auditory anomaly, unidentified structure. But inside ranger stations, people remember more than the paperwork allows. In 1977, a seasonal ranger named Paul Sloan worked at Yosemite. His patrol route took him along Tenaya Canyon, a gorge known among local climbers as the Bermuda Triangle of Yosemite. Between May and August, Sloan responded to 4 separate distress calls. In each case, the victims described hearing what they called singing, not voices, but a tone, low and continuous, that led them off marked paths. When interviewed later, Sloan told his supervisor, "It's the kind of sound you don't just hear, you feel it through the trees." There was no source found, and no equipment detected interference on park radios that night. At Glacier National Park in Montana, a 1993 field log recorded a different pattern. Rangers stationed at Kintla Lake reported discovering stacked stones balanced in spiral formations near the shoreline. Each appeared freshly built, the stones clean of moss and lichen. The formations would appear overnight and collapse by midday, as though disassembled by hand. One ranger, whose name was withheld in the official file, noted in handwriting along the margin, "Too organized to be wind, too quiet to be human." Visitors rarely hear about these entries. The public reports focus on wildlife, visitor safety, and trail conditions. But among rangers, there's a shared understanding that some parts of the park remain unexplained, not hidden, just never fully seen. Former ranger Joanna Pierce, who served 21 years at Olympic National Park in Washington, recalled an evening patrol along the Hoh Rain Forest in 2004. "The forest went silent all at once," she said in an interview for the 2015 documentary, Vanished in the Green. "Even the river sounded wrong, like it was moving through glass instead of air." She turned back 10 minutes later and found the same section of trail covered in small feathers, scattered evenly along the path for almost 200 yards. The weather that night was calm, the nearest bird nests undisturbed. In Yellowstone, the oldest national park in the system, the records go back further. A log from August 1911 describes an event near Heart Lake where Ranger Albert Winfrey reported a lantern in the woods moving without a carrier. He pursued it for nearly half a mile before it blinked out, leaving behind nothing but a patch of warm soil, as though a campfire had been stamped out. The incident is still referenced in ranger lore as Winfrey's Light and has quietly resurfaced in similar reports from 1965, 1989, and 2002, all within the same 10-acre area. What rangers notice more than anything is the pattern of silence. It appears without warning, lasts for minutes, and leaves behind an odd calm that feels heavier than fear. In Shenandoah National Park, Virginia, a search party in 1998 documented a sudden audio drop while tracking a missing teenager. All microphones recorded a drop in background frequencies between 2:17 and 2:19 a.m., as if the forest itself had paused. When sound returned, the temperature sensors showed a spike of 4 degrees. The missing hiker was found the next afternoon, sitting against a tree, dehydrated but unharmed, repeating the phrase, "Don't follow the lights." Retired Ranger Samuel Ortiz from Yosemite once remarked that training manuals prepare you for almost anything: weather shifts, animal encounters, even hostile visitors, but not for things that don't fit into those categories. In 2011, he led a 3-person team to recover gear left by climbers on the Half Dome route. The footage from his body camera, later archived at the Yosemite Visitor Center, shows faint movement in the background, something crossing behind tree trunks at unnatural speed. When questioned, Ortiz said only, "I watched the tape 6 times. Whatever it was, it didn't want to be filmed." For every confirmed case, dozens stay unreported. Many rangers prefer to handle them quietly, worried about ridicule or unwanted attention. A few speak under pseudonyms to researchers like David Paulides, who compiled hundreds of park disappearance cases in his Missing 411 series. One ranger told Paulides, "We're told not to speculate, just log it and move on. But after 20 years, you start to see the same stories with different names. Technology has helped little. Trail cameras malfunction in specific zones, drones lose signal near certain ridges, satellite phones drop calls along coordinates that otherwise have perfect line of sight. The National Park Service attributes it to terrain interference and magnetic variation. Still, field staff keep noticing how often the equipment fails moments before or after an unexplained event." In 2018, a maintenance crew at Grand Canyon National Park came across a cave system during a landslide inspection near Horseshoe Mesa. Inside were narrow tunnels descending into limestone chambers. The crew recorded a faint odor of ozone and sulfur, followed by rhythmic clicking noises that echoed deeper than expected. When they returned 2 days later with better lighting, the entrance had collapsed. Official reports mark the site as geologically unstable. One worker later admitted, "We heard something moving under the rock, like air being pulled in." The tone within ranger circles remains cautious. They are professionals, bound by policy, by the expectation of calm and clarity. But off-duty conversations tell another story about lights moving without wind, voices repeating radio calls seconds before they're made, and places where compasses spin as though disoriented by something unseen. In 2021, during a controlled burn in Oregon's Crater Lake National Park, a ranger named Dennis Falk captured an image on his thermal camera showing a figure crouched behind a fallen tree. The temperature reading was 12 degrees lower than its surroundings. The ranger moved toward it, but the shape faded on the screen before he reached the spot. When the footage was reviewed, the figure appeared only in one frame. Rangers don't speak of monsters or myths. They use language of observation: temperature, distance, sound. Yet the stories gather quietly, forming a separate archive beneath the official one. Forest after forest, year after year, they describe the same sensation, that someone or something is always a few steps beyond the light. The disappearances, no one filed. On paper, every disappearance in a US national park is documented, logged, and entered into a database. But retired ranger archives tell a quieter truth: not every absence was ever written down. Many were dismissed as walk-offs, miscommunications, or incomplete itineraries. What remains are fragments, half-filled logs, unsubmitted forms, and voices that spoke once and were never heard again. In 1973, in Yellowstone National Park, a backcountry guide named Henry Lott led 2 clients on a trail near Thoroughfare Creek, one of the most remote regions in the continental United States. The group signed out at the ranger station on June 12 and never signed back in. A helicopter search found their campsite untouched, pots on the fire ring, shoes by the stream, and Lott's revolver still holstered. The search area extended 50 square miles over 10 days, then ended with no trace. Years later, Ranger Joseph Falk noted in a memo that one of Lott's maps, marked with an unlisted trail, was taken by a regional supervisor and never returned. Other disappearances were quieter. In Shenandoah National Park in 1995, 2 wildlife biology students spent the summer cataloguing moth species near Skyline Drive. Their professor filed an absence report only after both failed to return to campus. When park rangers checked their designated site, they found equipment abandoned, but the tent zipped from the inside. Notes inside mentioned nocturnal interference. Followed by a list of numbers that didn't match coordinates. No formal report was ever released to the public, and the students' families later received a letter stating the case did not meet criteria for unresolved status. Park Service employees rarely discuss the missing unless asked directly. One reason is the pattern many vanish near geological oddities, deep caverns, magnetic disturbances, and glacial sinkholes. Another reason lies in the files themselves. Between 1980 and 2007, more than 1,600 disappearance reports were reclassified from open to incomplete documentation. According to former regional investigator Randall Merrow, these cases were transferred to a private data management system under the Department of the Interior. When Merrow requested access, his clearance was revoked. Some disappearances extend beyond human comprehension. In 2002, a search team in Rocky Mountain National Park found a man's backpack resting on a ledge 4,000 feet above the last recorded trail. The man, 4-year-old Thomas Bailey, was an experienced hiker from Denver. Inside his pack were dried rations, water, and a camera. The last photo on the roll showed dense fog and what appeared to be a tall, human-shaped figure, partially obscured by trees. The rest of the negatives were blank. When asked about it later, Ranger Emily Cross stated, "There was nothing supernatural, just a photo we couldn't explain." In Oregon's Crater Lake, records mention something more precise. A maintenance worker disappeared in 1977 while inspecting the Rim Village water pipes. His name was Larry Reeves. His toolbox was found neatly arranged by the path, but one wrench lay embedded halfway into the soil as though pressed by immense heat. Park logs from that day report no seismic or volcanic activity. Reeves was declared voluntarily missing. The official file ends with the phrase, "No further inquiry required." Several park workers have since spoken anonymously to independent researchers, claiming internal orders instructed them to downplay missing person incidents. A retired ranger from Yosemite's South District told an interviewer in 2018, "We were told to call them lost hikers, even when they weren't. Some of those people just stopped existing where they stood." He described a 1,999 recovery effort that ended when a helicopter crew spotted a figure waving from an alpine meadow. By the time the ground team arrived, the meadow was empty, but the footprints left behind were burned into the grass. In 2010, the Freedom of Information Act was used to request the Park Service's full missing person database. The response from headquarters stated that no centralized list existed, but journalists and families who compared regional records found overlapping entries, same initials, same dates, different parks. One file from Glacier National Park in 1986, listed under Mark D, described a camper vanishing near Hidden Lake. Another, from Olympic National Park in 1987, recorded the disappearance of M. Solo male, identical description. Both incidents occurred on August 11. Within ranger circles, these duplications are referred to as reflections, cases that appear to echo through parks separated by thousands of miles. One investigator, speaking to Outdoor Monitor magazine in 2009, said, "Sometimes it feels like we're chasing the same person across decades." There's also the matter of recovered individuals people found alive but changed. In 1961, a 7-year-old boy named Dennis Martin vanished during a family outing in the Smoky Mountain. Despite extensive searches, no body was ever found. In 1989, a hunter reported seeing a small, pale man running barefoot through the woods near the same spot. The ranger who logged the report, now deceased, wrote in pencil, "Could not determine age, moved wrong." The note was never typed or filed. A similar case appeared in 1994 at Mount Rainier. A woman missing for 4 days was found wandering near a ranger outpost, barefoot but unharmed. She could not recall her name, her route, or the previous week. Her pulse and temperature were normal, but she refused food, stating, "They said I already ate." When asked who they were, she stared toward the tree line and whispered, "The ones who hum." In the years that followed, new policies were introduced. Search and rescue data was centralized, radio logs encrypted, and incident reports shortened, but the silences remained. Rangers continued to find empty tents, running shoes by creeks, and single footprints pressed deep into soil that should not hold them. In 2022, a Freedom of Information request again sought the total number of unresolved missing persons within US national parks. The response came after 7 months. The Department of the Interior does not maintain a comprehensive national record of missing visitors. Attached was an unrelated chart about wildlife collisions. Behind closed doors, park staff speak cautiously. They say certain regions are marked "No Overnight Patrol" on internal maps. They mention small details, radio static that forms words, timestamps that repeat, and weather that changes abruptly only inside certain valleys. When asked for explanations, they say nothing official exists. Only fragments, only warnings passed down through new recruits. Never leave the trail after dusk. Never follow a second voice that sounds like your own. Somewhere between record and rumor, between order and wilderness, the disappearances continue. The recordings the service tried to erase. In 1983, at Yellowstone National Park, a ranger named Harold Keene carried one of the park's earliest field radios, capable of recording short transmissions, onto magnetic tape. On June 8, at 3:14 a.m., Keene's device picked up what he thought was interference from a nearby patrol unit. The playback later revealed something else, a long, distorted tone followed by a sequence of 3 knocks and a whispering voice that repeated the word "stay." Keene turned the recording over to his supervisor. The tape was logged, then disappeared from the storage vault within a month. No copies remain in the park's audio archive. That same year, Glacier National Park installed experimental microphones along Avalanche Lake to study nocturnal animal sounds. The system recorded continuously for 12 weeks. On the night of August 17, all 9 recorders captured a high-frequency pulse between 2 and 2:06 a.m. It was identical on every tape, an even wave, rising and falling every 4.2 seconds, strong enough to mask distant thunder. Technicians at the University of Montana analyzed it in September and concluded it did not match any known species or machine. The report was submitted to the Park Service, but later marked administrative sample error. The master reels vanished shortly after the equipment was dismantled. The first public hint of these missing recordings came decades later, when a retired technician named Barbara Norrin spoke in a 2011 radio interview. She described how the National Park Service maintained a small laboratory in Fort Collins, Colorado, during the 1,980 seconds. The lab's task was to analyze field recordings for research on acoustic ecology. Norrin recalled boxes of unlabeled reels that were stored separately from the others. Each box carried a red sticker reading North RP, short for non-reportable phenomena. When she asked her supervisor what that meant, he told her, "If you hear one, you'll understand." One of the last references to these recordings appears in a 1989 memo written by Park Administrator Douglas Milner. It concerned a file tagged Crater Lake Audio B17. The recording reportedly contained a sequence of harmonic tones inconsistent with environmental sources. Milner's memo ordered all copies recalled and transferred to Washington for evaluation. No further mention appears in the park's records. When journalists requested the file under the Freedom of Information Act in 2019, the National Archives responded that B17 had been destroyed under routine retention policy. Rangers who worked night patrols during those years still remember the equipment malfunctions. Portable cassette recorders would stop mid-tape, only to resume minutes later with new content of voice repeating ranger call signs backward or overlapping conversations that had never occurred. In 1992, during a backcountry patrol in Yosemite, Ranger Emily Cross set her radio on the log while assisting hikers. The device recorded 30 seconds of faint laughter, followed by her own name spoken twice in a tone lower than her voice. She filed a report. It was reclassified as equipment artifact. Cross resigned 3 months later. Other recordings surfaced in private collections. A small number were recovered from surplus government auctions during the 2000s, often mislabeled as bird call analysis. One tape, later digitized by amateur archivists in 2007, captured a sound from Shenandoah National Park in 1981, a rhythmic clicking that increased in tempo until it formed a pattern resembling Morse code. When transcribed, it spelled Northgate. The tape abruptly ended. When researchers visited the coordinates near the park's northern boundary, they found a patch of ground blackened, as if by lightning, though no storms had been reported in weeks. Park Service insiders quietly acknowledged the existence of a division once called the Natural Resource Preservation Team. Formed in 1980, it specialized in acoustic monitoring and radio data management. Internal documents suggest it operated for nearly 20 years before being merged with the Department of the Interior's scientific branch. Former employees say the team's true work involved filtering out anomalous content from public research data, essentially erasing anything that could not be explained. One such case came from Olympic National Park in 1994. Rangers there had placed motion-sensing microphones along the Ho River to study wolf reintroduction. On September 3, all units recorded a sound that began as a low rumble and grew into a series of mechanical tones similar to a slowed-down siren. Nearby seismographs registered no ground movement. The park closed the area for infrastructure maintenance. The original DAT tapes were shipped to Washington, D.C. and never returned. A curious entry exists in the National Park Service's 2001 annual report. It lists Lost Media Acoustic Project 17A, noting the loss of 42 hours of data due to contamination. No explanation was given for what contamination meant. However, a retired engineer who reviewed early drafts said the original language used the term temporal interference. In 2006, 2 digital technicians at Grand Teton National Park saved several deleted audio files from a malfunctioning hard drive. Among the corrupted clips was a recording of steady wind, interrupted by a metallic scraping sound. After the scraping ceased, a voice whispered, "Not wind." Both technicians were instructed to delete the recovered files. They made a private copy, which later circulated anonymously online for a few months, before being removed for copyright violation by an entity named Department of Resource Integrity. The handle traced back to a now-defunct federal domain. Rangers say these incidents changed how they work at night. Many stopped using recorders altogether. Those who still do often keep the devices running only inside vehicles, where engine noise masks the forest's silence. They claim the woods sometimes listen back. One ranger at Denali National Park wrote in a 2015 journal entry, "When I switch off the engine, the radio doesn't stop. It keeps breathing, slow and uneven." The current generation of park communications uses digital encryption. Officially, it prevents interference from visitors or hobbyists. Unofficially, rangers say it also erases traces. Automatic filters detect frequencies outside normal range and remove them in real time. No one can replay what never existed. In 2019, a set of leaked maintenance logs appeared briefly on a private forum for audio technicians. One entry described frequency collapse events across several western parks between July 6 and July 14. Each occurred between 2 and 3 a.m. and each caused simultaneous failures of both analog and digital recorders. The final line of the report read, "Signal present, source absent." When questioned, the National Park Service issued a short statement. All acoustic irregularities are attributed to environmental variables and recording equipment limitations. No unexplained phenomena have been documented. Yet within ranger stations, older staff still mention the tapes that played voices no one recorded, the tones that matched no species, and the files labelled NRP that quietly disappeared from archives. They say the forest keeps its own kind of memory one that records everything, but plays it back only when no one is supposed to hear. The eyes in the trees. Rangers speak of it quietly, most often when the night shift runs long and the radios hum without static. They describe the sense of being watched steady, patient, and close. Some call it instinct. Others call it the presence. It has no official record, but it threads through decades of incident reports under words like observation, unidentified movement, and visual anomaly. In 1979, at Sequoia National Park, a ranger named Alan Fisher was posted near the Twin Lakes Trail. His log entry for August 23 reads, "Observed eyeshine at elevation approximately 6 feet above ground level. Reflective, not animal. Held steady. When he aimed his flashlight, the reflection did not blink or move." Fisher wrote that it remained visible for nearly 30 seconds before dimming slowly, as if retreating inward. He checked the site the next morning, no tracks, no branches tall enough to match the angle. Similar entries appear across time and terrain. Yosemite, 1984, 2 rangers saw multiple points of light between the trees beyond Camp 4. Each point moved independently, aligning vertically, then vanishing in unison. Olympic, 1996, Night Patrol reported a pair of lights tracking along the ridgeline, maintaining equal distance apart, as if marking a path. Great Smoky Mountains, 2003. Campers near Klingman's Dome photographed what they believed were animal eyes until the flash revealed height beyond the reach of any known creature. To explain the pattern, biologists tested theories involving reflective insects, mineral deposits, even moisture on spider silk. None matched the brightness or consistency described in ranger logs. The eyes, if that's what they were, appeared too organized, too deliberate. One ranger described them as suspended, like they knew how to hold still. In Glacier National Park, a 1,988 training manual included an informal caution: avoid excessive spotlighting in remote valleys, misidentification incidents reported. The line was removed from later editions. A memo recovered from the same year explained that several rangers had experienced temporary disorientation after staring into unknown light sources. Their descriptions were uniform: a pale amber color, fixed stare, and feeling of vertigo. Medical exams found no visual damage. A rare audio record exists from that period. In Denali National Park, 1,991, 2 rangers equipped with helmet cameras documented a patrol near Toklat River. At 1:47 a.m., both cameras caught a faint flicker behind the tree line. The footage shows twin lights moving horizontally, roughly human height. They stop abruptly as the rangers approach, then disappear, frame by frame. The video ends with one ranger muttering, "They know we see them." The tape was stored, later redacted, and released for training only, with most of the visual removed. Park Service spokespeople deny any ongoing investigation into watcher phenomena, yet field notes persist. In 2007, Ranger Helen Cruz from Shenandoah filed a short report titled Visual Echo. She described standing along a fire road at dusk when she saw her own flashlight beam reflected back before she turned it on. Her entry concluded, "Reflection preceded action by 2 seconds." Accounts extend beyond staff. Hikers, campers, and photographers contribute details that match without coordination. In 2014, a climber at Zion National Park uploaded footage showing faint glints behind pine branches that seem to follow his ascent. The reflections vanish when approached, reappear when he turns away. The file was removed within a week after inconsistency claims. Others have captured stills that reveal faces made of shadow too defined to dismiss as pareidolia, too inconsistent to prove. A few witnesses describe more tangible encounters. In 1998, near Lassen Volcanic National Park, a ranger discovered an abandoned tent on the north slope. Inside were open notebooks filled with sketches of eyes. Each page bore a date and time. The final entry read, "They move when I breathe." The identity of the camper was never confirmed. Rangers who have worked in multiple parks sometimes remark on the sameness of these presences. The surrounding landscape changes, but the feeling repeats something just beyond reach, watching from a distance measured in trees rather than miles. A ranger from Grand Teton, interviewed anonymously in 2020, summarized it: "They're never close enough to see, but too close to ignore." Technology has not clarified much. Infrared cameras record shapes that vanish when the footage is played at normal speed. Night vision goggles reveal movement in directions opposite to wind or wildlife. Drones sent into suspected areas return with static, their lenses clouded, though no condensation is present. One team, in Mount Rainier National Park, attempted to triangulate light sources seen by campers in 2018. Their instruments pointed upward 30 degrees above the tree line, yet the sky was clear. Within ranger culture, certain phrases have become quiet signals. "Two watchers tonight" means the lights have been sighted again. Treeline holding suggests something unseen is pacing the edge. These aren't superstitions. They're shorthand for phenomena no manual can interpret. In 2019, a hiker in Olympic National Park disappeared for 8 days. When found, he had no memory of time passing. Interviewers noted his only coherent statement: "They were waiting behind the trees." His clothes showed no signs of exposure, as though he'd been sheltered. The ranger, leading the report's same cruise from 2007, wrote a final note: "Found near original location, forest undisturbed." It is unclear whether these eyes belong to animals, reflections, or something beyond current understanding. The National Park Service remains silent. Public records show nothing under the keywords unidentified observers or light anomalies. Yet among field staff, the instructions remain unwritten but well known. If you see the lights, don't approach, don't record, and never make eye contact longer than a breath. Some say the eyes appear only in places untouched for generations. Others claim they follow new construction campgrounds, communication towers, access roads, as though reacting to intrusion. Either way, the sightings align with one quiet rhythm. They arrive when the forest falls completely still, and they leave before the first sound returns. Whatever lingers behind the branches, the rangers continue their shifts, walking the lines between mapped safety and unrecorded silence, between what is seen and what only watches back. The caves the maps don't show. Deep beneath the ridges of the American wilderness lie chambers that don't appear on any public map. Some are sealed, others are erased entirely from the Park Service's digital survey data. Rangers who stumble across them are told to log their findings as unstable terrain, to move on and to forget. Yet fragments of old maps, hand-drawn in the early 1900s, still carry faint pencil lines leading toward the hidden hollows of the country's largest parks. In 1924, during an early geological survey of Grand Canyon National Park, a cartographer named George Kincaid claimed to have discovered a system of tunnels extending far beneath Marble Canyon. His report, printed briefly in the Arizona Gazette, described chambers filled with relics, tools of copper, tablets with unknown writing, and a statue carved from black stone. The Smithsonian later denied any connection to Kincaid, and the entrance he described was sealed by a rockfall soon after. Modern rangers familiar with the area note that the coordinates listed in the article correspond to a restricted section of the canyon known internally as Zone 7G. By the 1950 seconds, the Park Service had introduced standardized geological coding. Every cavern, fissure, and sinkhole was logged, yet certain entries from earlier ledgers quietly vanished. A ranger at Mammoth Cave, Kentucky, once mentioned that his predecessor's map showed 4 more miles of passage than the current one. The missing stretch was marked by a note: "Air flow from below, avoid." When asked, the modern superintendent said no such tunnels existed. Still, local guides insist that a cold draft can be felt near a sealed corridor behind a limestone gate labeled "Authorized Personnel Only." At Carlsbad Caverns in New Mexico, maintenance crews report sealed shafts descending deeper than official diagrams show. In 1972, a ranger named Robert Eames photographed one such shaft before it was covered. The image, later recovered from his personal collection, shows a narrow stone stairway spiraling downward, cut by hand, not by erosion. Within weeks of its discovery, the entrance was filled with concrete. Internal memos cited collapse prevention. Eames left the Park Service the following year, telling a journalist that he never felt alone down there. I.e., modern digital topography occasionally reveals absences blank rectangles within dense geological data, where measurements should exist but don't. Satellite imagery shows subtle color shifts, as if something below alters surface vegetation. In Yellowstone, an anomaly like this appears near Shoshone Geyser Basin. The area is marked as fragile ground, closed to hikers. Former ranger Harold Brandt recalled being rerouted during a survey in 1991. "We were told the ground wasn't safe, but the reading on my meter showed solid rock. What it didn't show was what the rock was hiding." In 2003, a spelunking group obtained special permission to explore a remote cavern in Great Basin National Park, Nevada. They mapped 2 new chambers, one ending in a smooth wall that reflected light oddly, as if coated in glass. When their report reached the regional office, it was withheld pending environmental impact review. The group never received their data back. A member later claimed they had found a passage leading to machined stone straight lines where no tool marks should be. Not all reports come from explorers. Maintenance staff, electricians, and rescue teams have encountered sealed openings by accident. In 2010, during repairs near the south rim of the Grand Canyon, workers discovered a hollow space behind a concrete support wall. It extended 12 feet before turning sharply down. When they returned with cameras, the gap had been filled. The supervisor's note read, "Handled per structural protocol." Some rangers quietly archived their own maps. At Mount Rainier National Park, a binder labeled Cave Index 1956 circulates among older staff. It lists dozens of coordinates missing from digital systems, most annotated with short warnings. Echoes persist, flow upward, no bottom sighted. Each entry stops abruptly, as though the author was interrupted mid-sentence. Attempts to cross-reference early surveys with modern GIS data show other inconsistencies. Entire cave networks once mentioned in federal geology bulletins, particularly in Arizona, Utah, and Colorado, now lack any record. Researchers searching physical archives find missing pages or overprinted sections. Even more curious, Ranger station blueprints from the 1,960 seconds contain underground corridors extending toward cliffs or ravines where no access now exists. One persistent rumor concerns a series of sealed tunnels beneath Yosemite Valley. In 1989, a ranger named David Nolan reported a temperature drop of 20 degrees near a granite outcrop behind Mirror Lake. When he investigated, he found a steel door embedded into the rock, painted the same color as the granite. It bore no handle, only a welded number, 53. The next day, the door was gone, replaced by rock that appeared newly blasted. Nolan's report was filed, then reclassified under facilities maintenance. Old miners' maps tell similar stories. In the 1,870 seconds, prospectors in the Sierra Nevadas documented breathing caves, openings that exhaled warm air at dusk and drew it back at dawn. Rangers working those areas today note strange wind shifts at night, as if the Earth itself were ventilating something deep within. Satellite LiDAR scans occasionally detect voids large enough to house entire buildings. Official explanations attribute them to lava tubes or collapsed water systems, yet some rangers say the shapes are two geometric right angles where nature rarely draws straight lines. Inside the Park Service, the topic is rarely discussed openly. Emails mentioning unlisted caves are flagged for security review. A policy memo from 2015 reminds staff disclosures regarding subsurface features must align with resource protection protocols. Off record, one ranger summed it up more simply: they don't want people looking down. When asked why, answers vary. Some cite safety, others cultural preservation, still others environmental control. But beneath each response lies a shared discomfort, the sense that something below the parks has never been fully mapped, that the land's quiet isn't emptiness but containment. And in the stillness of those sealed corridors, where drafts rise from unseen depths, rangers sometimes report a faint vibration through the soles of their boots, steady, rhythmic, and far too deep to belong to wind or water. The restricted valleys. Across the United States, several valleys inside national parks remain closed to the public. Official statements list the reasons as ecological protection, unstable terrain, or wildlife rehabilitation. Yet the closures rarely reopen. Some have persisted for more than 70 years. Rangers assigned to those sectors sign additional confidentiality forms that differ from standard federal agreements. They don't talk much about what's inside. One of the first of these restricted areas appeared in 1959 inside Yellowstone. The memo announcing it referred to a temporary conservation perimeter around a place called Pelican Valley Annex. The order, signed by then Superintendent Arthur J. Deming, stated that entry required direct authorization from the Department of the Interior. When aerial photographers tried to capture images of the area in the 1,960 seconds, their permits were denied. Pilots flying near the coordinates reported magnetic interference on their navigation equipment. By 1972, maps of Yellowstone no longer included the annex boundary at all. Only the older topographic charts preserve its outline, a perfect rectangle measuring 2 miles across. At Yosemite, another closure was established in 1983. It was marked as Zone 47, a riparian recovery. Rangers stationed nearby recall signs that read "No entry beyond this point, monitoring in progress." The signs vanished within a few years, but the chain of access remained. In 2001, a fire crew that entered the area without clearance was met by unmarked vehicles and escorted out. Their report described unfamiliar structures resembling field stations along the valley floor, none of which appear on any maintenance log. When the crew returned weeks later, the path was bulldozed and seeded with grass. Grand Canyon National Park lists another Zone 7G, officially designated geologically unstable. Satellite photos taken in 2009 show a narrow dirt road descending into the valley, leading to what appears to be an installation with rectangular roofs. The next available image, taken 3 months later, shows no trace of either the road or the structures, just disturbed soil. The Park Service attributes this to seasonal flooding, though meteorological data records no such event. In 2015, hikers at Mount Rainier reported hearing machinery deep in a canyon, officially labeled closed for rockfall hazard. The sound, recorded on a phone, resembled heavy engines idling, though there were no roads or construction permits issued nearby. Rangers who investigated described the sound continuing even when all recording devices were switched off, as if the ground itself carried it. A later inspection sealed the entire drainage basin behind a new barrier fence. Olympic National Park holds perhaps the most documented example. The valley known as Bogachiel Section B was restricted in 1977 for reasons listed as ecological restoration. Satellite data from the early 2000s revealed faint grid patterns on the valley floor, straight alignments, inconsistent with natural growth. When a freelance researcher requested a flyover in 2009, her application was denied under airspace sensitivity. She later received a letter stating the region was no longer in the public domain for administrative purposes. Declassified Department of the Interior correspondence from 1974 mentions an initiative called Site Containment Project, tasked with managing non-public ecological anomalies. The memo lists 3 parks by code only: YS, YO, and GC. Some historians interpret this as Yellowstone, Yosemite, and Grand Canyon, the same parks where the most persistent closures exist today. Rangers who've served near these areas describe faint visual distortions, light bending along ridgelines, a shimmer like heat haze on cold mornings. Instruments behave oddly, compasses drifting, radio batteries draining faster, cameras refusing to focus. Officially, these are dismissed as environmental artifacts. Unofficially, they're warnings. In 1988, a maintenance helicopter contracted to service fire towers in Glacier National Park reported an unauthorized valley crossing. The pilot's radio transmission ended mid-sentence with the words, "There's something," before cutting to static. The craft landed safely 20 minutes later, several miles off course, its instruments rebooted, but the pilot visibly shaken. He later told investigators, "I thought the valley moved." His statement was classified under psychological stress response. Modern technology hasn't cleared the mystery. High-resolution satellite imagery periodically shows what appear to be roads leading into restricted valleys, thin, pale lines winding through forest or desert. Weeks later, the same coordinates show nothing. Analysts cite cloud interference or data stitching errors, yet patterns repeat too precisely for coincidence. In some cases, the supposed roads align with historical trails long abandoned, as if something below the surface still follows them. At Zion National Park, a valley listed as off-limits to protect rare flora emits low-frequency vibrations detectable by seismographs up to 20 miles away. The frequencies are too regular to be tectonic, repeating every 41 minutes. A 2017 geological bulletin mentioned the anomaly briefly before the line was redacted in later editions. The most guarded region remains deep within Alaska's Denali National Park. Locals call it the Silent Basin. It was closed in 1989 after a series of helicopter malfunctions and the disappearance of a mapping drone. Pilots who fly over it note a strange absence of echo. Their radar pings return slower than expected, as if something absorbs the signal. During winter, lights have been reported there, faint amber orbs arranged in a circle that rise vertically and fade into cloud. The Park Service attributes them to auroral reflections, though the pattern doesn't match known aurora behavior. Rangers posted near these restricted valleys describe an unspoken rule: never enter unassigned coordinates, even if distress calls seem to originate from them. One supervisor summarized it during a 2016 training session: "If the map says no access, it means the valley takes care of itself." Researchers who study satellite archives find that even open-source imagery sometimes fails around these regions. Pixels blur or repeat, timestamps overlap. A few observers claim the edits are deliberate, automated by an algorithm tied to federal land databases. When cross-referenced, many of these blind spots correspond exactly with valleys closed since the 1960 seconds. Whatever the purpose, environmental, historical, or something else, the restricted valleys remain silent on record, yet active in rumor. They occupy the thin border between known wilderness and unacknowledged territory, where even the light seems to vanish a little faster than it should. And when the wind shifts across their perimeters, rangers say the air carries a sound that's neither mechanical nor natural, something steady, low, and too rhythmic to be random, fading the moment anyone steps closer. The rangers who vanished from the records. Personnel files inside the National Park Service are usually precise dates of assignment, training certifications, and exit documentation. Yet there are names that appear once and never again. Rosters from the 1960s through the early 2000s show employees who served brief terms, often in remote districts, before being listed as transferred without destination codes. In government databases, those codes are never blank. The first major cluster of missing records appears in Yellowstone's 1977 staff directory. 3 seasonal rangers, Paul Winton, Elise Hart, and James Larrabee, were listed for Pelican Valley Annex, the same sector later sealed under ecological research. In the following year's directory, their names are absent. No transfer memos exist. Payroll archives show payments ending abruptly mid-season, with a final line marked "Contract Closure, verified by field officer." When archivists compared signatures, the verification was signed by a superintendent who retired a decade earlier. At Yosemite, in 1985, a ranger named Cynthia Rowe wrote a letter to her family mentioning that she'd been reassigned to a special valley unit. It was her last known correspondence. The park's personnel log lists her as completed term, reassigned to Region 4. Region 4 covers Utah and parts of Colorado, yet regional files list no record of her arrival. In 1994, a new ranger training manual replaced the word reassignment with rotation, partly to simplify internal tracking. Older staff say the change coincided with a number of unaccounted exits. Among rangers, there's an informal phrase, off paper. It refers to colleagues who vanish from the system while their uniforms remain. Equipment is inventoried, lockers emptied, and names deleted from sign-in boards. Supervisors say it happens when employees resign unexpectedly or transfer to law enforcement divisions. But in several cases, exit interviews are missing, and vehicles assigned to those individuals reappear months later, unlogged but refueled. One such case involved Ranger Daniel Kearns, assigned to Olympic National Park in 1992. His vehicle was found at the edge of Bogachiel Valley, engine off, keys inside. He'd been part of a survey crew cataloguing wildlife migration. The next day, his supervisor received a phone call from a blocked number. The caller identified himself as Kearns and said, "Tell them I'm below." The call lasted 9 seconds. Phone company logs confirmed the signal originated within park boundaries 3 miles from the nearest tower. Personnel documents show similar anomalies at other parks. In Shenandoah, 3 maintenance workers disappeared from payroll on the same date in 2008. Internal HR emails labeled the deletions as retroactive terminations per directive. No directives were attached. A Freedom of Information request later revealed that their work zone overlapped with a restricted drainage basin that had been closed for recovery operations. Retired rangers remember quiet replacements, new faces appearing overnight, assigned to sectors without introductions. Some wore no name tags. A veteran ranger from Glacier National Park described them as federal observers rather than colleagues. They stayed a few weeks, never spoke much, then left. Their gear was standard issue, but their badges lacked serial numbers. There are also traces in external correspondence. In 1973, a Washington, D.C. field office received a letter from a ranger stationed in Carlsbad Caverns warning about unexplained disappearances among personnel assigned to subsurface mapping. The reply, preserved in photocopy, read only, "Cease communication outside chain of command." By the late 1990 seconds, internal systems had shifted to digital record keeping. Even then, blank spots remain. Data audits show missing employee IDs with numbers that should have been sequential. Park Service administrators call them data migration errors. Yet the same gaps align with years when restricted valleys and sealed caves were first documented. In 2013, journalist Avery Cole interviewed a retired park investigator named Richard Fenley, who had worked under the Department of the Interior's Risk Mitigation Program. Fenley described cases where rangers were quietly reassigned after reporting unauthorized phenomena during patrols. He said their files were moved to a closed access server called NRP Black. "If you saw something they couldn't classify, you didn't get fired," Fenley said. "You just got absorbed." Unofficial ranger circles still share stories about those absorbed staff. One concerns a team in Denali's Silent Basin, where 3 rangers vanished during a 1990 search for a downed helicopter. The report filed to headquarters listed the mission as unsuccessful weather-related, but weather records show calm skies. 2 months later, their positions were filled by new hires without orientation. Occasionally, fragments surface. In 2017, an internal training video on wilderness safety accidentally displayed archived footage labeled Personnel Review 1988. The frame list included 3 names marked non-return. The video was replaced online within hours. At ranger reunions, older staff speak with restraint. They mention colleagues who stopped responding to radio calls mid-shift, only for their identification cards to be revoked within the same day. They remember lockers cleared before dawn, cabins reassigned by evening. The silence surrounding these losses is cultural as much as administrative, learned, not ordered. Today, the National Park Service's official employee count includes approximately 20,000 permanent and seasonal staff. Yet internal payroll codes show non-matching totals across divisions, with as many as 70 positions classified under auxiliary operations. No description accompanies the category. Those who've tried to trace the missing names run into dead ends. No forwarding addresses, no pension accounts, no death certificates. Their existence is confined to archived radio logs, half-completed patrol notes, and photographs where one face remains unnamed. Some rangers claim to hear familiar call signs crackle faintly through static on old frequencies, long-retired voices using phrasing from decades past, identifying posts that no longer exist. One technician described the sound as a signal looking for its record. Whatever became of those men and women, their absence lingers like a missing trail on a map, acknowledged privately, erased publicly. The wilderness keeps its own ledger, and within it, the rangers who vanished remain assigned, still somewhere inside the lines no longer printed. The storm logs. In most parks, the weather is as carefully recorded as the wildlife. Each station keeps daily readings of barometric pressure, wind direction, humidity, and temperature. Rangers are trained to track these fluctuations because even a small change can trigger landslides, flash floods, or lightning strikes. Yet buried among decades of data are entries that do not match regional climate patterns, isolated storms that begin and end within minutes, magnetic surges, and air pressure shifts confined to single valleys. These are the storms no one explains, known among older staff as the anomalous events. The first mention appears in a 1949 weather log from Glacier National Park. The entry describes a single-cell electrical disturbance lasting precisely 87 seconds. The report reads, "No visible cloud formation, static discharge detected at ground level, smell of ozone present." Rangers who experienced the event said their compasses spun freely and their watches stopped. When the instruments reset, the second hand advanced 7 minutes ahead. That night, a ranger tower reported seeing a glowing haze above the tree line. The phenomenon was later written off as ball lightning, though meteorologists reviewing the logs noted the absence of any atmospheric condition capable of producing it. In Yellowstone, a similar pattern appeared 30 years later. Between June 14 and 16, 1,979 multiple patrol units observed lightning striking repeatedly in a clear sky above Hayden Valley. Each strike occurred at exact intervals 45 seconds apart and produced no thunder. The official report filed by Ranger David Knoll described it as light without sound. Radio communication failed during each flash. When transmissions resumed, all devices displayed identical time, drift precisely 1 hour behind standard time. The anomaly was logged as instrument desynchronization. Crater Lake National Park holds one of the few remaining physical artifacts from such an event. On the 5th of September 1983, after a brief electrical storm over the lake, maintenance staff found several metallic rods embedded in pumice near the shore. The rods appeared to have melted at both ends but were cold to the touch. Laboratory analysis at Oregon State University concluded the material was stainless steel alloy, yet with a crystalline pattern inconsistent with known manufacturing processes. The rods were taken by federal representatives for further study. No results were published. In 1998, a network of weather sensors installed across the Great Smoky Mountains detected a sudden drop in barometric pressure, 20 millibars, in less than a minute, restricted to a 2-mile radius near Klingman's Dome. The surrounding sensors remained stable. The following morning, hikers reported finding hundreds of birds lying on the ground, apparently uninjured, as though frozen mid-flight. Park biologists documented the scene, but could not determine cause of death. The event was filed under localized inversion. Unreleased reports from the 2000s show similar localized disturbances in restricted valleys. At Yosemite, an internal memo dated July 2003 describes microburst-like winds of undefined origin, strong enough to uproot trees within a contained 300-foot diameter. Aerial photographs taken afterward show the affected trees lying in a perfect spiral pattern. The official explanation cited tornadic downburst, though meteorological archives list no storm activity in the region that day. In 2011, satellite magnetometers over Utah's Arches National Park recorded abrupt geomagnetic deviation measuring 6 times stronger than the regional average, lasting approximately 2 minutes. The anomaly was centered over a section labeled off-limits for rehabilitation. When local weather stations compared data, they found no corresponding atmospheric event. The magnetic surge went unreported in public bulletins, but appeared in an internal Department of the Interior memo labeled Field Anomaly 237B. The memo's final line read, "No further ground investigation authorized." Rangers who have witnessed these storms describe them not as weather, but as silences that move. One report from Denali in 2015 recounts a wall of wind advancing through the tundra without sound. Visibility dropped to 0 for less than a minute, during which the ranger's handheld GPS lost all satellites. When the air cleared, his position reading placed him 1.4 miles east of where he stood. The Park Service classified it as a sensor recalibration issue. Older technicians recall a separate phenomenon, the hum that follows. After the storms, a faint, low-frequency vibration lingers for hours, sometimes days, detectable on barometers and occasionally audible to human ears. It registers between 18 and 21 Hz, below standard hearing range, yet recordings amplify it as a rhythmic pulse. One ranger, who studied audio logs in 2008, noted that the pattern resembled a repeating heartbeat, as though the ground itself was breathing. All researchers outside the agency have tried to correlate the events with seismic data, solar flares, and geomagnetic storms. None align. The disturbances do not follow known planetary or atmospheric cycles. They occur in isolation, often near the same restricted areas described in older maps. The coincidence has not gone unnoticed by former staff. A 2017 whistleblower, identified only as Ranger H, released excerpts from what he called the storm logs copies of incident summaries dating back to 1965. The documents described 47 separate microbursts confined to national parks. Each included the same 3 notations: static interference, magnetic deviation, and no damage recorded. Within days, the documents disappeared from the archive where they were posted. Investigators traced their removal to an IP address linked to a Department of the Interior server in Reston, Virginia. Satellite imagery shows subtle environmental consequences that follow these events. Vegetation inside affected zones often appears slightly grayer in infrared photos for months afterward, as if photosynthesis had slowed. Wildlife cameras placed nearby fail more often during the same periods, showing corrupted frames and flashes of light not visible to the human eye. Despite decades of observation, no single report attempts to explain the storms directly. Instead, each one closes with language that repeats across time. Environmental fluctuation recorded. Site stabilized. No further inquiry recommended. When rangers speak off record, they describe these moments as the forest's breathing episodes, as if something below or within the land stirs and resets itself. One veteran ranger summarized it after 40 years in the field. They call it weather, so they don't have to call it anything else. The files marked for eyes only. Inside the Department of the Interior's Records Division, most reports are standard maintenance summaries, wildlife counts, budget allocations. But every few years, a separate folder appears. The covers are unnumbered, the titles redacted. Staff refer to them simply as eyes-only files. Their circulation list is small: park superintendents, select law enforcement liaisons, and federal administrators with dual clearance. The contents are rarely discussed, yet fragments of these documents have surfaced through misfiled copies, whistleblowers, or brief public mentions before deletion. One of the earliest eyes-only references dates to 1947. The memo was addressed to Regional Command, Western Parks Division, and bore the subject line, "Unexplained Event Mammoth Cave Extension." It described a 12-hour period during which communication with a mapping team ceased. When contact was restored, the team reported having experienced complete visual loss despite headlamps active. The entry ends with a single phrase typed in uppercase: contain and classify. The report was never published in the Geological Survey Bulletin, where it was originally destined to appear. In 1962, an eyes-only memorandum circulated within the Park Service's engineering branch. It concerned subterranean interference at Grand Canyon's Zone 7G. The same region closed soon after. The document mentions vibrations at unrecorded frequencies and temporary relocation of personnel. Handwritten at the bottom of one copy is a note: "Do not allow Site 53 access without liaison present." The phrase Site 53 reappears decades later in restricted maintenance files from Yosemite, attached to a list of GPS coordinates now scrubbed from modern maps. A former records clerk named Susan Delaney later admitted to seeing one of these folders while stationed in Denver in the 1980 seconds. She recalled the title stamped in red: Environmental Incidents Non-Standard Phenomena. Inside were photographs of flattened tree lines, shaped into perfect circles, and aerial images of valleys that appeared illuminated at night from no known source. When she asked her supervisor for context, he told her, "It's handled elsewhere." Delaney transferred the following year. The structure of eyes-only files follows a pattern: an incident report, an internal communication from the superintendent, and a concluding assessment from the External Liaison Office, a department not listed in any official Park Service chart. Their contact address matches a suite in Reston, Virginia, shared with a satellite office of the U.S. Geological Survey. No public record shows collaboration between the two agencies. Among rangers, a quiet phrase persists: filed to eyes. It means an event has left the normal system. The moment that phrase appears on a report, local copies vanish. Weather data, patrol notes, and photographs are collected and shipped to Washington. The incident ID is replaced with a single word: closed. In 1976, Yosemite staff reported this exact process. A lightning storm struck near Tenaya Canyon, followed by reports of a glow beneath the granite. Two climbers captured photographs of a faint white light seeping from cracks along the wall. Within 48 hours, representatives from the Department of the Interior arrived, collected film rolls, and issued a non-disclosure order. The final internal memo bore the notation "Eyes-only natural containment confirmed." The 1989 Yellowstone file, known as Project Umbra, remains among the most whispered. Although never officially acknowledged, a 1,992 oversight audit references unbudgeted allocations for Umbra logistical support. Park employees who were present describe road closures under the pretext of trail maintenance, but no equipment was seen. One ranger recalled being told to avoid a specific valley for safety, though it had no history of landslides or wildlife hazards. When he asked later what had happened, his supervisor replied, "It's been moved to eyes." More recent accounts suggest the classification continues. In 2014, a maintenance report from Denali National Park describing low-frequency harmonic vibrations inconsistent with geologic norms was logged under the eyes category before deletion. The ranger who filed it found his access credentials revoked a week later. His name was removed from personnel listings the following month. Declassified fragments of correspondence reveal the existence of a joint ecological containment program operating within park boundaries. Its purpose, officially, was to manage anomalous environmental occurrences. Funding records trace back to a budget line under emergency climate monitoring. The sums are substantial millions, allocated annually with no breakdown of expenses. Technicians who serviced communication systems in 2016 noted encrypted channels labelled E-Link active between remote ranger stations and an address belonging to the Reston office. The transmissions occurred at irregular intervals, often following reported storms or unexplained equipment malfunctions. When a journalist requested connection logs, the National Park Service stated those frequencies were dedicated to environmental monitoring, unrelated to visitor services. In 2020, an anonymous source released partial scans of what appeared to be an eyes-only index. Among the titles were entries like Thermal Event Crater Lake, Personnel Deviation, North Cascades, and Magnetic Collapse Field 04. Each listed coordinates, dates, and a short status line: contained, relocated, or unobserved. None bore a closing report. Those who have handled these files described their tone as clinical, stripped of speculation, yet heavy with omission. They read like fragments of a larger system, quietly documenting phenomena that defy categorization. One retired superintendent, when asked why these files exist at all, said simply, "Because something is watching the parks, and we're just the ones taking notes." The eyes-only files remain absent from public archives. Every attempt to request them through the Freedom of Information Act ends in the same phrase: no responsive documents found. Yet the staff who've seen their covers insist they exist sealed, transferred, and waiting for someone with the right clearance to open them again. The patterns beneath the soil, beneath the familiar trails and visitor roads of America's national parks, lies a landscape few have ever measured. Ground-penetrating radar surveys, seismic readings, and magnetic maps, when viewed together, reveal formations too regular for coincidence. Straight corridors, intersecting at angles too precise for erosion. The official term is subsurface anomalies. Among field technicians, they're called, simply, the grids. The earliest recorded anomaly appeared in 1952, when the US Geological Survey performed a series of magnetic flux tests across Yellowstone. Instruments registered linear magnetic disturbances stretching in parallel lines beneath the caldera. Each band measured nearly the same width, 22 meters, and ran east to west for miles before fading. The lead geologist, Dr. Robert Henning, noted in his field book, consistent alignment, not geological, suggest engineered strata. The final published report excluded that sentence. When similar readings emerged at Yosemite a decade later, the data were quietly stored under the Natural Resource Preservation classification. A memo from 1964 marked the correlation between Yellowstone's bands and new readings taken below Half Dome's western face. Both showed magnetic deflection patterns at depths too shallow to be volcanic. When compared, the lines matched orientation within a margin of less than 1 degree. In 1971, the Bureau of Mines conducted deep core sampling in Grand Canyon's eastern rim to evaluate mineral rights before the area became fully protected. Borehole records indicate repeated interruption segments where drill resistance dropped sharply, as if the bit passed through hollow spaces. One engineer scribbled a margin note, "Voids too symmetrical." His report was filed, then replaced by a simplified version showing uniform bedrock. By the 1980 seconds, digital magnetometers allowed more precise mapping. Data collected from parks as distant as Glacier, Zion, and Carlsbad Caverns revealed a faint but repeating geometry bands of low conductivity, forming a grid pattern spanning hundreds of miles. Each intersection point aligns with either a cave system, a sealed valley, or a zone previously marked restricted. A 1989 internal summary prepared for the Department of the Interior labeled the findings Pattern Integration Hypothesis Preliminary. A copy of that summary, leaked years later, lists 37 sites where identical magnetic oscillations occur at exactly the same intervals, 8 minutes, 32 seconds apart. The oscillations resemble pulse signatures, suggesting active rather than fossilized structures. Government meteorologists proposed that the signals might be linked to lightning or seismic echo. Geologists disagreed, noting that the patterns persisted even during calm conditions. Rangers stationed near these convergence points report physical sensations, vibrations underfoot, faint static on the skin, and compasses rotating slowly before locking north again. One ranger at Mount Rainier described it as standing on something alive, waiting to breathe. Seismic sensors sometimes record minor tremors that lack identifiable origin depth, as if movement occurs in layers above the actual rock. LiDAR scans taken in 2003 during a forestry initiative revealed a rectangular depression under dense forest in Olympic National Park. Beneath it lay a reflective plane roughly 80 feet below ground, extending at least half a mile. The data were transmitted to a federal geological server, where they were labeled mirror interference and excluded from the public dataset. A technician who reviewed the original scan said it looked like a flaw. In 2009, magnetometer arrays used for mineral mapping in Utah's canyonlands produced readings showing repeating square signatures every 4.8 kilometers. The technician who logged the data compared them to ancient irrigation systems, but at a scale impossible for human construction. His entry was redacted from the final report. Across the country, these grids maintain near-perfect alignment, regardless of terrain. They ignore mountain ranges, rivers, and tectonic fault lines. Satellite imagery in the infrared spectrum occasionally shows faint heat differentials along the same alignments, cooler lines, cutting through otherwise uniform land. The phenomenon is consistent across all seasons. Independent researchers have tried to reconstruct the network using archived government surveys. When mapped together, The lines form a vast geometric pattern covering much of the western United States, intersecting major parks like points on a lattice. At each intersection stands either a deep cave, a restricted valley, or the remains of a pre-Park Service mining operation. In 2016, a university research team conducting ground-penetrating radar tests in New Mexico's Carlsbad region discovered a repeating echo beneath the cave floors, regular pulses spaced evenly like sonar returns from hollow architecture. When compared with Yellowstone and glacier data, the echo frequency was identical, 19 Hz. Internal memoranda from the Department of the Interior reference these echoes under the term subsurface resonance events. One document, dated May 2018, concludes that multiple park regions exhibit coordinated, low-frequency activity with no apparent natural source. The final paragraph, heavily redacted, contains 3 visible words. Depth remains unknown. Rangers rarely hear about these findings, but those stationed near survey zones describe visible consequences. Trees with roots fused into stone, soil that clinks when struck with a shovel, and ground temperatures fluctuating by several degrees within minutes. The surface looks ordinary, but instruments read motion far beneath, slow, rhythmic, like tides inside rock. Geophysicists who've studied fragments of this data admit privately that no known geological process produces such uniform structure. The recurring pattern, spanning thousands of miles, appears intentional, an arrangement predating the parks themselves. One retired analyst summarized it simply: "It's as if the land was built first and the mountains came later." The National Park Service denies any knowledge of these grids, attributing anomalies to data overlap or equipment calibration errors. Yet every major park surveyed since 1950 shows the same invisible architecture beneath, aligned, unbroken, and still humming faintly through the stone. Whatever lies beneath the soil remains silent, its pattern repeating like a memory the earth refuses to erase. The Night Patrol files. Every ranger knows the forest sounds different after midnight. Radios crackle slower, the air grows dense, and distances seem to stretch. The Night Patrol logs, rarely read outside the stations, capture this atmosphere in flat, measured language. Beneath that calm tone, however, a pattern emerges. Synchronized sounds, repeating lights, and voices that seem to call for help where no one stands. These entries, scattered across decades, occur almost exclusively near the magnetic grid intersections described in geological data. The earliest mention dates to 1,956 inches Yellowstone. Ranger Edwin Hale recorded in his log, heard SOS pattern from East Ridge, no visual contact. Responded on foot, found empty clearing. Echo repeated, closer, from behind. His supervisor annotated the entry. Auditory reflection, likely equipment interference. Hale noted that the pattern continued for 10 minutes, 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, each sequence timed to the second. No transmitters were active in that sector. In 1974, Shenandoah Rangers investigating a reported campfire near Hawksbill Gap followed what they thought was a distress whistle. When they reached the ridge, they found only burned grass in a perfect circle, 6 feet wide. The audio recording from their patrol car, preserved briefly in archives before removal, captures faint, rhythmic knocking. The pattern aligns with seismic pulses detected beneath the area the same night at precisely 19 Hz, the same frequency noted in subterranean grid studies decades later. Grand Canyon logs from 1988 mention radio crosstalk between patrol units separated by over 30 miles. Both units reported hearing identical transmissions, a woman repeating, "I'm here." The signal carried on a ranger frequency not accessible to visitors. The voice, when analyzed, matched neither officer. A review by the Communications Division found no evidence of external transmission. The official explanation cited weather skip. Yosemite's 1,993 incident archive includes an unusual report titled Night Resonance Tenaya Canyon. Ranger Sarah Lynn described hearing footsteps parallel to hers during a midnight perimeter check. "They paused when I paused," she wrote, "and resumed only when I moved again. She turned off her light, expecting an animal. The sound continued at a human rhythm, heel, toe, until it merged into the forest silence." The following morning, a colleague found identical boot prints alongside hers, matching her tread pattern exactly, but reversed as if mirrored. These reports, when arranged chronologically, follow the same rhythm as the underground pulse logs. roughly 8 minute intervals between anomalies. By 2001, the Park Service began encrypting radio frequencies overnight, citing visitor prank interference. After encryption, incident counts dropped publicly but continued internally under a new code. NRP 47, Nocturnal Response Phenomena. Retired Ranger Leonard Muir, who served at Mount Rainier for 27 years, once said in an interview, "Every park has a sound it shouldn't have." In 1999, his team recorded what they thought was distant thunder. The waveform analysis showed perfect symmetry, identical peaks and troughs, repeating for 9 cycles. When they triangulated the source, it led to a meadow with no wind, no clouds, and no thunder. The ground there vibrated faintly for hours afterward, like a heartbeat buried beneath moss. Rangers who work night patrols develop habits, tapping the radio twice before speaking, whistling softly to check echoes, counting seconds between responses. They say it's the only way to tell what's real. Some describe hearing their own call signs spoken back to them moments before they transmit. Others mention voices repeating conversations from earlier shifts, word for word. The recordings exist, but only briefly. Digital logs from 2012 show files auto-deleting within 24 hours, a feature added, officially, to reduce storage load. Visitors have reported similar experiences. In 2015, campers in Glacier National Park uploaded audio of what sounded like a park ranger asking them to stay inside the tent. The voice used the correct local name, Ranger McAdams, but the real McAdams was off-duty, miles away. The file circulated online for a few days before being removed for copyright violation. Some night patrol entries mention light formations appearing in sync with radio distortions. In Olympic National Park, August 2007, ranger teams saw 3 vertical shafts of light rising from the tree line. Each flash corresponded to a momentary radio blackout lasting 7 seconds. The pattern repeated 3 times. Magnetic sensors in the same area recorded oscillations matching those flashes. The report, labeled NRP47A, ended with the phrase, "correlated to subterranean resonance, incident closed." Occasionally, the phenomena seem responsive. A ranger in Denali in 2019 described hearing her own name whispered through static during a late patrol. She answered instinctively. The radio returned a single word, "copy." Her body camera later captured faint flickers of movement along the tundra, too distant for identification. Headquarters dismissed the footage as light refraction. Across multiple parks, these encounters share precise timing. They occur between 12:03 and 12:11 a.m., regardless of time zone. At that interval, all unrelated radio noise ceases. The silence is total: no insects, no wind. Then come the sounds: knocks, hums, footsteps, or human-like voices. The episodes last between 90 seconds and 2 minutes. Afterward, the environment resumes normal behavior as though released from suspension. When a researcher compared these logs to subterranean data from the pattern integration hypothesis, the timestamps matched exactly with peak magnetic fluctuations recorded underground. The implication, though never written officially, is that the night voices and the grid pulse are the same event, one heard above and one below. Modern rangers are instructed to record anomalies only as audio interference. Still, within the quiet corners of ranger stations, copies of the night patrol files circulate informally, passed from one shift to the next. Each file ends with a similar observation, that something moves through the parks at night, neither animal nor machine, using sound the way others use light, testing the edges of attention, calling out only to those who answer back. The directive. Every ranger knows it exists, though no one has ever seen the full text. It isn't printed, and it doesn't appear in any employee manual. Yet its presence is woven through quiet conversations, unsigned memos, and the way certain events are handled without question. Among staff, it's called the directive. Those who've been in the service long enough say it began as an oral policy, a set of spoken rules passed quietly from chief ranger to recruit during midnight briefings when the station lights are low and the forest outside is still. The first clear reference surfaces in a 1940 circular from the National Park Service titled Operational Continuity Under Exceptional Circumstances. The language is bureaucratic but deliberate. In the event of phenomena inconsistent with ordinary observation, personnel shall prioritize containment and continuity of visitor experience. One line stands out: the public must leave with the same world they entered. In 1965, a version of this directive resurfaced in an internal department of the Interior Communication, bearing no signature. It outlined procedures for non-catalogued incidents in federal lands. The document required immediate radio silence, site isolation within a quarter-mile, and direct reporting to an unnamed liaison office in Reston, Virginia, the same address that appears decades later in the eyes-only files. Rangers who worked during that period recall being told to secure without statement. A former superintendent from Glacier National Park described the briefing he received in 1981. You're going to see things you can't write down. When you do, you mark the coordinates, you log weather, and you call it an infrastructure anomaly. Then you forget it. He said it calmly, not as superstition, but as instruction. Others remember identical phrasing from completely different parks. What binds these accounts together is their consistency. Every ranger who mentions the directive recalls 3 steps: observe, contain, omit. Observation ensures the agency has data. Containment keeps visitors away. Omission removes the event from public record. The simplicity makes it effective and nearly invisible. Some of the directive's details have leaked through incomplete files. A 1997 field training video, recovered from a decommissioned server, showed a narrator explaining emergency communication procedures. At the 20-minute mark, the voice says, should a field event occur outside standard categories, maintain perimeter and await black badge personnel. The term black badge doesn't appear anywhere else in Park Service language. The clip was replaced days later with a shorter version, the segment removed. Rangers tell quiet stories about those personnel arrivals who wear no insignia, carrying black identification cards instead of the usual green or blue. They arrive after storms, after disappearances, or when night patrol anomalies grow frequent. They don't introduce themselves. They ask for data logs, batteries, sometimes soil samples, and leave before dawn. One ranger from Yosemite said the air smelled like ozone after their helicopter lifted away, as though the weather itself had changed. The directive also defines what cannot be done. No ranger is to pursue lights beyond map trails. No body is to be retrieved if coordinates fall inside a restricted grid zone. Drones are prohibited in magnetically unstable regions. Every decade, new phrasing hides the same meaning. Do not interfere with what moves beneath the parks. A file recovered by an environmental attorney in 2018 through a partial Freedom of Information request contained a memo titled Contingency Sequence 7B. The document referenced deep acoustic registers and surface behavioral parity. Its closing line read, "The directive remains active until subsurface resonance ceases." No further context was offered. The letterhead was unmarked, except for an outline of a pine tree. For the few who break silence, the consequences are subtle. One ranger, who spoke to a journalist about unrecorded valleys in 2005, was transferred within the month. His email account vanished, and his pension records listed him as private consultant. Another, who shared photographs of lights above Olympic National Park, found the images corrupted on every backup device. He later said the files deleted themselves like they knew they weren't meant to stay. Inside ranger culture, the directive isn't spoken of with fear so much as resignation. It's part of the job, like storms or bears or lost hikers. The old hands teach new recruits how to phrase reports so they survive the review process. Never say light, say reflection. Never say voice, say feedback. Anything more specific triggers audits, and audits bring the black badges. There are hints that the directive extends far beyond the Park Service. Weather stations, geological teams, and environmental contractors describe identical restrictions. A meteorologist stationed near Denali in 2019 said his instruments detected low-frequency oscillations not consistent with atmosphere. When he submitted the data, his supervisor replaced the report with a copy bearing a new title, Routine Instrument Drift. At the bottom was a single reference code, D17. Over time, rangers began compiling their own private copies, shadow archives, written in notebooks kept off-site. One such notebook, recovered from an estate sale in 2022, contained 43 entries labelled Directive Events. Each listed a park, date and short observation: Yellowstone lights below ridge, Shenandoah, sound before storm, Olympic silence movement east. The final entry read only, grid pulse, visible through rain. They were watching us back. When pressed for answers, senior administrators deflect. They point to budget constraints, environmental safety, or public relations. Yet beneath the layers of explanation lies the same quiet logic that began in 1940. The wilderness must appear untouched. even if it isn't. The directive ensures that mystery remains part of the scenery, not the headline. Those who have served long enough say you can sense when it activates. The radios fall silent. The line supervisors go indoors. A helicopter may circle once, then vanish. The forest grows unnaturally still, and all anyone can do is wait for the sound to return. Later, the paperwork will call it weather, maintenance, or training. But the rangers will know the directive moved again. For decades, the policy has achieved its purpose. Visitors leave believing the parks are only forests and stone, wind, and wildlife. The truth remains buried under layers of soil, protocol, and silence. Somewhere beneath the trails, the grids still hum, the valleys still shift, and the unseen watchers still mark who walks after dark. And every ranger, whether they admit it or not, understands that their real job isn't just to protect the land. It's to protect what the land is hiding. The forests remain open. The trails are still marked. The signs still say, welcome. But behind those words, a quiet system continues, one that documents what it can't explain, classifies what it can't contain, and erases what it can't control. Rangers still walk the perimeters, radios still hum, and the directive still waits for its next call. The lights return, the hum repeats, and another line disappears from the public record. Maybe it's the land remembering something older than us. Maybe it's something that never left. Whatever the truth, it's written somewhere inside the silence of those parks, under the soil, behind the trees, and beneath the pages that were never meant to be read. If you want to keep exploring the hidden archives, subscribe, leave a comment, and join us again where history ends and what waits beneath the wilderness begins.